Hi, Angelica.
Hi, hello.
And my first question is, what is a good musical composition for you?
A good musical composition for me is something that moves me, that makes me feel something. It's not so much about whether I like it or not, but if it does something in me, if it changes the world I hear or see the world, it if it moves me, it makes me feel something.
And can you give me the last piece example? Last piece? Can you name the last piece which has this impact on you, which moved
Oh
you?
wow.
Like,
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been writing a lot of music, so sadly, I haven't been listening to a lot of music. It's one of the sad things about writing music for me. It's that um, I can't listen to as much music as I'd like. But I would say um, it's more of an album
mhm.
um, by this Spanish artist. Her name is Rosalia, and I really admire her work. And she, um, yeah, I mean, there are many songs that I love in that album, but just it's been a while since I've listened to a full album that makes me feel like there's like I can get lost in it. It's
Mhm.
almost as like I want to listen to it from beginning to end. It's been a while since I've had that experience with a record. So yeah, I would say Rosalia's Motomami is one that I keep coming back to.
Yes, yes, can you tell what moves you, right? What triggered you this feeling?
Yeah, well, I think the album it's very minimalist and has very few elements. Her voice is at the center. It's like very electronic and sometimes piano, but very simple, raw elements, and it feels like it's the just what's essential for the songs to communicate, and it's so well thought and so well crafted. Like there's nothing that doesn't belong there. Everything has a purpose and an intention and a reason. um Her lyrics also, her way of singing, and I think and the production too, and I think um she's also for me doing something really unique in that genre and mixing experimental music with pop and reggaeton and in a way that is she it feels like she's doing something very new with it. um she's deconstructing genres, deconstructing the live show too. I was able to see her live at Radio City um with my friend Caroline Shaw, actually, who collaborated in that album, and she invited me to the show. And the live show too, it's almost as she's showing the seams of like how a live show is made. Same with the album, there's like this deconstruction aspect of it that's like showing you how it's made and then tearing it apart before your eyes. That's really exciting and refreshing to me.
Mhm. And how would you describe your own music?
That's always a hard question. I think I would describe it as open and honest, vulnerable, sometimes playful, sometimes more melodramatic and heartfelt, um, sometimes irreverent. It depends, but I would say the thing that doesn't matter how the piece sounds, the thing for me that stays as a constant is the vulnerability and the openness.
And how would you define what is vulnerability and openness in musical terms, right? Because it's
Yeah, it's more of a sensibility than thinking of specific musical choices. I think it's more of how I approach. every piece. I think before, like a long time ago, I used to be really in my head about what I thought I needed to write or how I needed to sound, and I was trying to like, I don't want to say please other people, but just kind of more like try to prove myself. It's like I'm a composer, here I am. But I stopped caring about that a little while ago, and I think no matter how like how I start a piece or what I'm writing, the first step for me, it's always like, am I being honest with myself? And are these the sounds I want to be creating? Are these the words I want to be playing with? Is So just coming at it from a place that feels genuine and authentic, and not like I'm trying to be someone else that's not me. So yeah, so in musical terms, I think, I guess, to like go back to your question, it reflects more on like a lot of the pop influences that I love, and that have been a really important part of my musical life. Before I started notating music down on paper, I was making music with bands. That's still a very big part of what I do. So in musical terms, it's meant more incorporating those things and not feeling like guilty or like, oh, this doesn't belong in the concert hall. Like just being like, okay, these are things that I enjoy. They can all live and breathe in this piece.
And do you have a signature, right? Musical signature?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think there are things that are very much my sound. I am very curious about different sounds in the environment. So using field recordings and using electronics that a lot of times come from acoustic sources. So like found objects, things from my kitchen, from my house, field recordings from when I go back and forth to Puerto Rico, and which is where I'm from. I think there's the lo-fi quality that comes sometimes with those recordings too. It's something that I think it's very me. Um, and then I think there's a rhythmic sensibility that's very like syncopated and playful, juxtaposed with like drones and soundscapes. Those are things that I'm very drawn to. But every piece, it's its own kind of world, and I'm really interested in different mediums. And I write music for for orchestras, but also for plants, for robots. I sometimes write music for kids and sometimes for drag queens. So it's very, my interests are very broad. But I think there's a common thread of like this fascination for non-conventional sounds and non-conventional instruments, and seeing how I can incorporate them in my music.
If you would born right in the United States, not in Puerto Rico, right?
I was born in Puerto Rico.
Would your music would be different, right? If you would be born in
I see what you're saying. Yeah, if I was born in the States, if yeah, of course, yeah, I think where we come from, who we are, who our parents are, who our neighbor was when we were 3. Yeah, all those things shape what you write. It might not be as like, it might not be as like a connection of like this chord or this musical gesture, but it's, I think, whatever an artist creates, it's a sum of all the things that have made them who they are. Yes. And it's impossible to separate your identity from that. So yeah, I think all those things matter a lot. Yeah.
And do you have at least some intuition or some feeling or some ideas? What is Puerto Rico factor to your music?
Yeah.
Right? What it could be, right?
It's a bit, yeah, that's a really big question, because Puerto Rico is a very complex place with a really complex identity. We are a U.S. territory. We are not part of the U.S., but we are born American citizens. And some people think of that as a privilege, but also it's come at a very high cost. And there's been a lot of injustices that have happened with the people of Puerto Rico that are still ongoing, that intersect with natural disasters and many other things. So Puerto Rican identity is very complex because it's the status of the island, whether it's a colony, for many people like me, think of it that way, but others feel like it should be a state, or some people are pro-independence, and people feel like it should be stay as it is as a colony. So I think it's a all of that almost confusion. I think it's very inherent to the Puerto Rican sensibility, like that it's not, oh yeah, we are Latinos, and we have these rhythms. Sure, we have those things, but there's also a lot of Walgreens and Walmart, and there's a lot of, right now, a lot of American culture that is also threatening the what's native in the island in a very violent way too. And then there's also the resistance of the people that live there that are fighting for what for what belongs to them, and that resistance also looks very different from other places in the world. Like, our protests are very creative. And it's like lots of pots and pans. There's lots of very creative ways of protesting that are very unique also to Latin America, but also to Puerto Rico. So I think all of that, like the resistant humor as a way of resistance to dark humor, a melodramatic sensibility, this kind of like assertion of identity, all of those things infiltrate in my music, because it's just a really important part of who I am.
If you would born like a man, right? Would your music would be different?
Yeah, there's no way I can know that, because I was not born a man. But I think, same as being Puerto Rican, it's another part of my identity that shapes how I move through the world, how others perceive me, how I perceive myself, how I was raised too, because of gender too. So I think, and those are things that are just really important markers that make up a human. So it's inevitable, I think. Yeah.
Do you make music with other media, like videos or dance or?
Yeah. Yeah, I really love scoring films, particularly documentaries.
Yes.
So I do film scoring, and have now been actually right now have been working on 2 film scores for 2 documentaries. And I also really love multimedia things, and
Yes.
more installation based pieces that are like go beyond the concert hall, that have other elements, whether it's visual or collaborations with instrument builders. So it's something that I really love. More immersive, site specific things. I have done things like in a forest, or just thinking of pieces that are modular rather than have a beginning and an end in a specific place. Just like you can walk through the piece and also engage and interact with the piece and be a part of it. And yeah, and I also make music with my band Balún. We've been together for a long time, and that's a collaborative project with my closest friends. Most of them from Puerto Rico, some that live there, some that live in the States. And yeah, so I also have been working on an opera as well. So I'm really interested in different kind of modes of expressing something. And for me, the more entry points, whether it's oral, sonic, or visual, or tactile, or smell, like all the senses are for me
Yes.
just equally important as sound.
So do I correctly understand that you identify yourself as, let's say, multimedia or intermedia composer?
Yeah, I guess I don't, when it comes to defining like words, I don't really think so much of those of like words. I just make things.
Yeah.
But I guess, yeah, I guess you could say I move pretty fluidly between things and don't think so much about it, but could, yeah, like could identify as someone that's
And
more
what's the difference
multimedia.
when and what's the difference from composer perspective, right? When he or she writes sounds only, or when she or him writes this multisensory piece, what's the biggest difference?
I would say there's like it's different ways of creating, and some people like to focus on one, which is sound. There are some composers that are pretty just like that's what they do, and that's great. I think even if I'm not writing something that's multimedia, even if it's a chamber piece for a string quartet or something that's just musical, I'm always thinking visually. Um, I do sketches and drawings and shapes, um, and I'm connecting it to other visual experiences, and that's just how my brain works. So I think it's more of a sensibility from how I approach making things. Um, because even if it's not connected to a project that has all these elements, my brain is working that way, and I just I have a hard time thinking of only sound. For me, sound is always connected to a place or to a person or to an object or to a memory or to a texture or color.
Got it. And what is your way of composing? How you start, and what kind of stages you go through?
It's kind of very not necessarily messy, but just all over the place. So a lot of gathering and collecting first. So that could be on the phone, recording things like ideas with my voice, sounds from outside that might make it as the electronics of the piece. But gathering, collecting many things. Also, words on my notes app, just like writing words of, it could be words of um, scratchy textures. It could be like bubbly textures. It could be a person, just like kind of brainstorming of collecting things that come to mind when I'm thinking about the piece and what I think it would be. Some of those things might not make it into the piece, but it's just like an initial brainstorm. So words, also links to images or podcasts or YouTube videos, like a lot of different connections of things. And it could be a song from a Rosalia album, a song from a Bjork album, an Arc album, a piece by Julia Wolf, and it's not like the piece I'm writing it's gonna sound like that, but there's something about it that is connecting. So it's like a web of many different things that connect and intersect, that are inspiring when I'm writing. And then so that's one of my favorite parts of the process is collecting. And then I sit down and I sometimes sketch visuals or like the shape of the piece, the form, also changes as I'm writing, but just to have a clear sense of how it's going to move, like textures and density, timeline. And then even if I'm writing for an orchestra, I'm always on Ableton Live as if I'm producing a song. So recording every part with a keyboard and hearing it and then layering on top of it, playing. If there are electronics, I start often with the electronics, manipulating and processing the sounds, and then building on top of that the acoustic instruments. So it depends on the piece, but it's and if it's a collaboration, then the gathering, collecting part of it also is very important to have it be done with the person that I'm collaborating with. But it's a lot of research and preparing before writing notes.
Mhm. Yes, and then you start research, right? And then after the research stage, are you start writing the score, or there is something between? I don't know. You write some concept, or
Yeah, I mean the concept starts.
or you listen, or you have some internal voice in your head with music and with image. Or
Yeah, it depends on the piece. I think a lot of the times I am um, as I am collecting things, I already have, sometimes I have a very clear sense of the concept. Sometimes I don't, and I'm just collecting things and then finding what's resonating at that moment. But oftentimes that part comes before I write any notes. It's rare that I just sit down and just write notes and then as I'm going to think of what it's going to be. It's most likely I take a lot of time in the pre-composition
yes,
part of the process.
yes, yes. And which is the most favorite technological artifacts which you use, software or hardware?
Oh, I think Ableton Live, it's really changed the way I compose. I've been using it for many years, and I started using it for scoring for films.
Mm-hmm.
But then I used to be very, I think, very traditional in my thinking of like a composer needs to write down on paper and sit at the piano and to be like an actual composer. And yeah, I don't think that anymore. I think that the interface in Ableton Live is for me very inviting. It feels not like work so much. It just feels like I'm playing around, and for me, like that creative playground is really important. Especially because I'm writing so much music that I want to always reconnect to that part of the process that it's like I'm excited about sound. I don't want it to feel like, oh, I have this deadline and a mission and I want to be reminded that I'm like just having a good time and that this is something special rather than think of it more as work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also really love. I have like a small. I don't have it here, but I have a small MPK mini keyboard that travels with me everywhere. That's super light and tiny and has pads and 2 octaves, and I love it.
Yes, yes. Okay. So software is the Ableton and the small, right,
Yeah,
keyboard.
it's a. I can. Yeah, it's MPK mini. Yeah, an
Okay, got it. Got it.
Akai little controller. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and good. And how your music changed during last 10 years?
During the last what? Sorry,
Last 10 years, right?
last 10 years, a lot. In 12 years, it's changed a lot. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. You froze for me, so
Yes.
yeah, it's changed a lot. I think I used to be very like I since many years ago I've been playing in bands and very involved in experimental electronic pop music, and I kept that very separate from my life as a composer. So I would write things for the concert hall that a lot of the times are really influenced by Russian music, which I love. Um, and then I would go to play shows with my band and would never combine the two. And I would say about 12 years ago, it was the first time, it was like between my master's and my doctorate, I was not showing my music to anyone. I was just writing music for myself, and I started blending more the worlds and being more fluid not making distinctions of like, even if I'm writing this piece for a harp trio, why can't I not write it on Ableton Live rather than Finale or Sibelius?
Yes.
And so that's the tools actually changed a lot of my music, because Ableton was what I used for making music with my band. So I just like the blending of those two worlds really has made a huge impact in my music. It's meant that I'm more open and unapologetic about my love for melodies and pop and electronic and experimental music. Um, yeah, it's changed a lot.
Yes, yes. Can you just um, mm, tell a little bit about your band? What kind of music it plays, or what?
Sure, yeah. Well, we play. It's very tropical, very Caribbean. It has a lot of influences from the dembow rhythms um, that are a very important part of reggaeton, which is very a very kind of famous genre in, well, now it's global, but it in Puerto Rico was one of the places where it started. And so it has that. It also has a lot of luscious textures and dream pop influences and shoegaze influences. So it's a mix of all the things we love with a Caribbean twist, and it has some folk instruments from Puerto Rico too, Puerto Rican-4, tiple, some Afro-Caribbean percussion too. So, but it's all of that through a very kind of dreamy lens.
Got it, got it. So, do I correctly understand, right, that in the last 12, 10, or you said 12 years, the biggest change was that your search for integrity between two worlds, right? So you don't want to be frustrated with academic world, right, and what you do with your band. So you want to integrate, right? That was correctly I
Yeah,
understand.
that's true. That was the big change. Yeah, was not making distinctions between those worlds and just thinking of everything as one thing.
Um, when you describe your band, right? You mentioned that your band in your band you're using Puerto Rico instruments, right? Some
Yeah.
local. Do you use in your academic works as well some Caribbean instruments or Puerto?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not so much. I have some film scores that have used Puerto Rican tiple and cuatro, um, but I think, well, actually not cuatro, but tiple I've used, and I think there is like the rhythmic sensibility is something I can't escape. So it's there, and it infiltrates sometimes in ways that's more obvious in my music, in my concert music. Sometimes it's more hidden. I talk a lot with my mentor Tania Leon about this because her music has that so present. Um, but yeah, and sometimes there are instruments in the orchestra like clave or or some drums that or guiro that have that connection, but I think it's in a way that's less obvious and less upfront. It's in Balún, it's part of the instrumentation, so it's part of the fabric and the sound that we have. And it's also the people that play it come from that tradition and they've been playing it for many years, and it's our friends and family, so it's just a part, an inherent part of the group. For my music, I think it's just like with any piece, it's more of like if a piece is asking for a specific texture of an instrument, and um, yeah, and then when that happens, I often bring people from Balloon to play my music.
Got it. And what do you fear as composer the most? What is your composer fear?
Oh.
Or what is the source, right? Let's say, well, let's say,
Yeah.
what is the source of your composer fear?
The source, you mean?
Yes, of fear.
Yeah.
What you fear, right?
Yeah, I think I never grew up even though I was playing violin for a long time, I never grew up seeing living composers, or women composers less so, or people that look like me in front of an orchestra. So especially when I'm with orchestras, like writing pieces for them, I like imposter syndrome kicks in, um, of like, what am I doing here? Do I know what I'm doing? So I think that's more of an irrational fear, because I think intellectually I know it's not doesn't make sense, and that I'm capable and I know what I'm doing. So, but it's something more like that I can't control myself, that I'm trying to get better at.
Got it.
But real fear that scares me, it's um, not being excited about music, or not having fun writing music. And I never thought I would make a life of, like, that I would be a full-time composer. And so that's very exciting, and I'm really grateful for that. But sometimes it's a lot of that's asked from me, of like, have to constantly be writing and creative. And so I never want to get to a place in which I'm not excited about something I'm doing. I always want to have my whole self and heart in
Got it.
everything I do.
And why do you still compose music, right?
What's that?
Why do you still compose music?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I cannot do it. It's just I can't help myself. It's just the way I not only express myself, because there's many ways I think that I can express myself. That's definitely the one I'm most comfortable with. But I think it's that for me, it's the way I also process and heal, and how I understand the world around me. It's my way of making sense of things.
And how music scene, right, the United States, new music or contemporary art music scene changed during this century?
During what, sorry?
During this century, right? How it changed?
Oh, during this century, yeah. How have they changed?
Yes, how? Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think obviously with so many changes in history, that it's inevitable that people change, and then arts and culture reflect what is happening in the world. Sometimes quite literally, a depiction of what's happening. Sometimes more as escapism, or a way of ignoring what's actually happening, but still connected to its time. It's unavoidable, I think. So I think more recently, one of the things that is exciting to me is the incorporation of more electronic elements. And not only, I think it has been very common for many years, mostly in chamber and in other works, but in like more larger, massive mediums like orchestra, like bringing in those elements and changing the sound of the ecosystem of the orchestra, changing like that, that evolution of it. It's really exciting to me. And also the how like barriers of access to making music has shifted to that, that many people have now tools to make choices with sound and play around and be a composer. That's exciting to me. So I don't think composing should be only for people that have gone to school to study it. I think it's something that a lot of people can play with, and that there are many people that make music in many different ways that are not necessarily notating music. That's just one way of making music. And the democratization of technology, and the dismantling of those access barriers, that there's still some, but it's way more accessible now for people to make music. And that's exciting to me, how not only other people can, there's more stories that we hear, which is for me always great, but also that then we hear those, and then there's a lot more conversation between the work I create and those artists, and like just the connections between those, and how I think it's something that's needed for, if we think of classical or new music, how it needs to keep evolving. It needs to be connected to the other makers and creators of the time, not only in music, but visual arts, poetry, and just, yeah. And obviously the internet has allowed for a lot more connection between art forms and artists in different parts of the world.
And how audience change?
The audiences? I think, yeah, well, I think in the landscape of, like, if we think of this last century, I've only been making music for 20 years. So, which it's a lot, but it's also in the larger landscape very tiny.
Yes, sure.
Yes. So I think, yeah, I think because of what I was talking about before, and this openness to have more genres that are not strictly classical in concert halls, and have artists that also, like, could be pop artists that have a string ensemble accompanying them. That's something that's more common now, I think, because of the conversations and the fluidity between genres and styles. I think that audiences are also shifting and changing, because then we get audiences that might not have been to a concert hall before and now are interested, and vice versa, which is something that I hope for more. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the perpetual question of classical and new music too, especially in spaces like orchestras and operas, and just these larger institutions that have such historical baggage, to think of like how we can be more inviting to others, and of course commissioning living composers that have different stories to share, and different sound palette is a big part of it. But just, I think also there's a lot of work that needs to be done in thinking thoughtfully about the communities that orchestras and ensembles are part of, and think of ways of connecting to what's already happening in the community, rather than being like, oh, we have culture for you or art and you should come and appreciate it. Sure, but also important for me, it's that what's already happening there, and how can we have a conversation with that. Yeah, there's like not like more of a two-way street of connection and conversations, rather than I share something with you and then you just listen. Something more active rather than passive.
Yes, got it. And what are how you see, what are those trends which create future, right, or which will shape future of new music or contemporary art music in the United States?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of your question.
What are the main trends which shape future?
Main trends.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think main trends. I think I feel like I've been talking a lot about this, but it's just what I've been seeing, and it's very also it's what's a lot of my peers and friends and colleagues are working on. It's again, this fluidity between genres, and like people that are not only writing music for the concert, but also have a band, and or also play solo stuff, or also are doing film scores, and or producing a record by a pop artist, or collaborating in vocal arrangements with a pop artist. I think that easiness of traveling between things that before were very separate is something that I identify myself, and I see a lot of other people around me doing. And then I think also a kind of hungry, like just this, maybe this is also even more true in the past 3 years, because of the pandemic, we've been also so distanced that I think there's even more of like a hunger for a connection in terms of collaborations and between different art forms like dance, music, and I mean that's something that's obviously happened before, but I think now more so and I think it has also to do with that fluidity that I was talking about before. Now there's more opportunities for and more desire, I think, for collaboration and not thinking of the boundaries that are within medium or style, just like expanding. I think expanding so might be a good way of describing this. Is just like what else can we do, and how also we can invite others in. So as part of that, I'm seeing a lot of more site-specific works that are outside of the concert hall, things that are like just ways of rethinking the concert experience that invite more people in.
Mhm. And what is a role of contemporary art music in United States society?
Well, that I think you have a lot of big questions. That's another one that I mean, I would just personally, I think it's to make people just rethink or how their view of the world. For me, that's an important one. It's something that does something in you that it makes you like it changes your perspective. And I don't mean in a way that's black and white of like, oh, I thought of this before and now I changed my political views or religious views. I don't mean in that sense. I mean more like if I go to a concert and I had a profound experience with a work of art, same with visual art or any other medium, that when I leave that space in which I had that experience, I am in the train and I'm appreciating things in a different way. I'm tuning to the world with sound and with my eyes in different ways. Not necessarily like everything is magical, but not like that, but just like um, I'm seeing different perspectives that maybe I was ignoring before. So um, I think that hyper awareness of surroundings and others' perspectives leads to empathy that is much needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got it. And one last question: what would be your free suggestions to younger composers, right?
I would say follow your intuition. Just whatever feels right is the right way. So um, I think sometimes, at least in academia, there's a lot of narrative that's tied to, just like this belief of theory and composition being one thing. And I hear sometimes composers are like, oh, I want to compose but I don't know enough theory, and I'm like, you don't you can just go do your thing. So follow your intuition, whatever sounds you're hearing, try to capture them and share them with people, and um, make things as much as you can, anything. um, Not limit yourself to music, but just try to create in as many different ways as you can. Sometimes even without the pressure of it being something that needs to be a product or in an album, or just like make things for the joy of making. Um, and then I would say listen and look and experience as much as you can to, not only many different artists that are creating things in different worlds, different parts of the world, different stylistic genres and worlds, but also I think just listen it deeply and attentively and look around deeply to the world around you, because that's going to feed not only what you make but also your quality of life. So just be attuned to and present.
Yes, thank you very much for our conversation.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.